So we are going to overreact, which brings us to stock down and teams
Yes.
that things are not going great. There was actually a lot of competition for these spots this week because there are probably a lot of fan bases and a lot of coaching staffs that are in a very frustrated mode. Let's start with Auburn and Hugh Freeze, where the Hugh Freeze experiment is not going super smoothly. Quarterback play is rough, to say the least. Peyton Thorne, Hank Brown, Peyton Thorne, a lot of mistakes, a lot of interceptions. Hugh Freeze supposed to be this offensive guru, not working. They lose to Arkansas. They also lost to Cal a few weeks ago. Like, these are not the opponents that you're supposed to be losing to. And now you have Hugh Freeze going out and doing an interview where he says, well, I think if we played Arkansas 9 more times, we'd beat them all those times. Doesn't matter. You lost the one when you actually played. So things just seem very dicey. Hugh Freeze is also throwing his players under the bus in his post-game
Yeah.
press conferences. It's just, it's uncomfortable in the Plains.
And let's also be clear, if you played Arkansas 9 more times, I'm not exactly sure that you'd win all 9 of those. So, like, that was a crazy thing to say to begin with. The throwing the players under the bus, he's not wrong about what he said. You also shouldn't do that. Like, it's not the right thing to do in terms of winning in the locker room. I think coaches have to win in a lot of places. They have to win in press conferences, obviously on the field. You have to win in your locker room as well. That's not giving you any points there. And I think Hugh Freeze is in a really precarious spot from the standpoint of it was a super risky hire for Auburn to bring in Hugh Freeze and all of his baggage. And like, besides how good of a coach we think he is, there's blowback that happens with that. And there are people on the outside that are rooting for his failure because of the baggage that he has from his past. So he's got to get the thing turned around. And especially if the offense does not look good, I don't know what leg he has to stand on.
Right. I mean, that was part of it. It was that he had won and had these great offenses everywhere he'd been. And that we saw that at Liberty, which got him this job and the second chance in the SEC. He was throwing his players under the bus because he was basically saying, like, I called a great game. There were guys open. Someone couldn't find them. Like, that was essentially what he's saying, right? So not a great feeling if you're a quarterback at Auburn. Big buyout. Like, we're not talking hot seat. We're just talking about an
Right.
uncomfortable situation where the coach that you hired, like you said, big risk, maybe big reward, it's not going to plan. You're not taking that step forward in year 2 that you expected to. Another coaching situation. This coach has been at their school for 6 years in their second stint. Mac Brown. UNC loses to James Madison 70-50. This is a basketball score.
Yeah.
And it was so bad. And we saw, I mean, JMU was just electric. There were over 50 points at the half. They were scoring on offense, defense, special teams, everything. It was all working. Mac Brown was so emotional and struggling to comprehend this loss that there were rumors coming out of the post game that he was telling his team in the locker room that he was like stepping down. I think it was something like, if you're not performing well and it's on me, like there was a lot of emotion, right? And he had to clarify that he is not resigning, but that he took this loss really hard. So things are not great for the Tar Heels right now. And I think you have to wonder, is Mac Brown going to step down at the end of the season? Like, what does this all mean with him saying, like, if I'm not the right guy, if we can't win games like this, if this was so embarrassing, maybe I'm not the right coach. That definitely puts a lot more in flux than just one loss.
Yeah, it's he's in an interesting spot for sure. I don't like doing the whole what people need to do in terms of their job situation, but it would be reasonable if at the end of the season Mac Brown decided that he was going to retire from coaching. He's done it for a long time, had a ton of success, and it feels like it's just running out of steam. Certainly when you give up 70 points in the game, like there's just something that is wrong with what's going on right there. But the emotion, I think, is understandable. Like, if I was a coach and we gave up 70 points in a game like that, I would be really emotional too. And I would be questioning my existence, not only as a coach, but probably on, like, where do I fit into the grand scheme of the world if we're giving up 70 points in a game? So understandable, yes, but like UNC, it's a bad look. Like, I know you guys are known as a basketball school, but you can't have basketball scores in a football game.
No. And that is obviously, I'll mention it, but I'm sure you could guess the most points that they've ever given up in a football game.
Well,
And that's a
yeah,
JMU team that scored far less points against their FCS opponent the prior week. So
Yikes.
Again, it's JMU, first year head coach Bob Chesney, big win for them. But that's something you cannot do if you are North Carolina. The last grouping of teams that I want to put in stock down are the group of 5 teams that had picked up really big wins so far this season. So that would be Northern Illinois, that would be Toledo, and that would be Memphis. We talked about how big those games were and how they will carry over the course of the season as we eventually get to comparing these group of 5 champions and resumes for the playoff spot. And then all 3 of those teams subsequently lost. 2 of those lost in conference games, which, like, you have to win your group of 5 conference to be in contention.
Right.
So this was clearly like everyone's been hearing how great they are, how big these wins are. And we had some letdown games. So it's a little tough to process for these teams that, again, like, had these huge highs, now having a quick low.
It's the world, right? Like, everybody has the letdown. It's the thing that you try to guard against when you are a coach. In particular, when you're a coach at a G5 school, you want to make sure that when you have the momentum, you can keep it and capitalize off of it. But this is how the sport goes. And now these races get a little bit more mucky. And one of the questions that a lot of us had coming into the year is how exactly all this plays out, right? And, like, for some of these G5 teams that have a huge win on their resume, one of the questions I have is, like, we talked about Liberty, for example, and how they would have to run the table because their schedule is not great. Well, how would you compare a Liberty versus a one-loss G5 team that has a huge win against a Power 5 opponent on their resume? So now we might be getting into these types of conversations by the end of the year, and I'm curious to see how the mind of the committee would look at those things.
Yeah, and I went through the mock selection committee last week, and, like, everything's color coded. So you see, like, your quality of opponent, you see the quality of a win, the quality of a loss. But even so, last year with Liberty's schedule being so drastically different than SMU, they still got the spot, right? Like, the committee
Yeah.
still put them in there, and it's a different committee each year, but you do have to see that value. You also have coaches in the room being like, it's really hard to win every game, no matter who you're playing.
Right.
So these are really good points. And I think, again, this just makes the G5 race so much more interesting down the stretch, even though these teams took losses that will definitely impact that as we get closer to the end of the season.
Yeah, and I was never a huge proponent for automatic bids and the expansion, but I do think there's a lot more buy-in as a viewer of the sport now with some of these G5 races, teams I might not have been super interested in before. And so I think that's one of the huge benefits of expanding the college football playoff field.